Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Model Health podcast, the official podcast for those looking to optimize their long-term health and weight goals, and more importantly, understand how their body really works. I am your host. I'm Shemaine Linney. I am a nutritional therapist, integrative health practitioner, and biohacker. I'm very happy to have you back with me for another part of your day and our first podcast guest of the new year. Super exciting. Before I introduce him, I will remind you that the information in these podcast episodes is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. Please consult your health practitioner before making any lifestyle changes. So today, help me welcome back Dr. Sam Shay. He is the first guest of 2024. And if I am correct, Sam, you are also the first guest of 23 because we did our
Oh,
last conversation like January 5th, I think, of 23. So,
well, we're the beginnings of a tradition. We'll just have
yeah.
to schedule 25 right now on out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Total coincidence, though I will be honest, I didn't plan this. So, Dr. Sam Shay, DC, IFMCP solves health puzzles for busy, health conscious moms, mompreneurs, and adults with Asperger's so that they can exit survival mode and re enter community. Known as the friendly lab nerd, Dr. Shay specializes in functional lab and genetic analysis for data driven results. Dr. Shay is also a stand-up comic. Check out his stuff. He's quite funny, using clean observational comedy to help educate and entertain people. And I asked Dr. Sam back because I wanted Sam to come on. He is one of the experts that I follow on everything related to genetics and methylation, along with a few others, but I highly respect his perspective and his educational approach on this topic. Last year, we kind of touched on genetics and fat loss and that sort of stuff. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. There's a lot of talk about methylation and genetic testing right now, and I wanted Sam to come on and give us the truth, fill in the gaps so we have the whole picture. We're going to kind of mention, I'm going to say it straight out the gate. There is a guy going around now. Many of you have heard of him because you've approached me about what do I think about what he's saying and this, that, and the other. His name is Gary Breco. And the reason he's kind of on the headlines now is because of the work he's done with Dana White. And it's not that everything he said is wrong, and it's not that we don't dislike him. We want to fill in the gaps and make sure that you understand the bigger picture around methylation, what it is, genetics, and all of that fun stuff. So I'm going to just let Dr. Sam go and teach us, Sam.
Sure. Thank you, Shamin. Um, so the episode basically what happened is Gary Breca did a podcast with Joe Rogan in late last year, and Gary's team helped Dana White, who's the head of the UFC, come back from the brink of like insanely high triglycerides, really high blood pressure that wasn't being helped by medication, and all these other health issues, thyroid issues, and so other things that were really screwing him up. I mean, and it was very likely, given the way he was describing Dana's health. And by the way, Dana's published all of his bloods online, has openly talked about this. So it's a full permission to discuss. And he's no stranger to controversy. And I mean, in some small way, it may be some clever marketing thing because the more you talk about Dana White, the more you look at UFC, which supports his business. But also, the guy I think generally feels tremendously better, and I do applaud for sure Gary and Gary's team for what they've done. And the podcast itself focused on five genes. And this is the five genes surrounding methylation, specifically MTHFR, MTR, MTR, AHCY, and COMT. And we don't need to unpack like what those actually stand for. I mean, you can win a Scrabble tournament if you want a first name basis with all of these genes. But that's not the point. Not to show off how polysyllabic one can be. It's that he focuses on five genes within the methylation pathway. Gary, when I listened to the podcast, I very much respected how good of how articulate a teacher Mr. Breco is, like how good he was very good at simplifying the concepts down to understandable language. He covered a very wide range of topics from like the history of seed oils to what the importance is of methylation, how it influences blood pressure, amongst many other things. The issues around different types of vitamins and the problems with certain synthetic vitamins versus vitamins that are found in nature, and the problems that those cause, and how there's, based on a genetic mutation, you can't process, 40-ish% people can't process the synthetic vitamins that were sprayed in all our grains, etc. And he's an excellent teacher, and he also mentioned some of the other modalities that he uses, whether it's cold therapy, pulsed electromagnetic fields, um, uh, cold therapy, electromagnetic field, and there was one other I'm blanking on at the
I think
moment,
it was
but
sauna.
sauna, thank you. Yeah. So he focused on he focused on other modalities as well, and nutrition, and the importance of real food, and the importance of getting really quality supplements, and the importance of genetics testing. And the concerns that I share with Shemaine, that why she reached out to me, was that the five genes that Gary was focused on, it appeared as if those were the key core five genes that everyone needed to have. And it seemed like magic bulletism to me. It seemed like this is the magic genetic bullet, like these
Big
five
small.
rounds, and then this is it, and that's the complete story. And you can just have this magic transformation, which a lot of people can. I don't deny that. At asterisk, in conjunction with all the other therapies that he was mentioning. And what I wanted to do for this podcast, and there's a visual. If you're listening, I would highly encourage you to watch at some point. Um, I'm going to go through the rest of the methylation pathway to show the dozen other genes that are involved with methylation, as well as talk about the process in the body that are superordinate to methylation. Yes, methylation touches on all the processes in the body, but it makes it, Gary made it sound like it's unidirectional. Like methylation controls everything. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. There are things that control methylation. So I would rather not fixate on methylation. I would include methylation in my analysis, absolutely, but I would not give it the seat of primacy at all, because there are things above methylation like inflammation, free radical scavenging, vitamin D utilization, liver detoxification, that can absolutely throw methylation into a different direction, that you need that is more important to handle within the body, of which methylation is a coping mechanism of how to adapt to those other processes. So that's what I'm going to cover today. It's going to be a more technical conversation than most podcasts. So do buckle up a little bit for some super nerd gloriousness of methylation. Anyway, so what you're looking at here on this slide is the homocysteine methylation map. And so what you're looking at is there's a lot here, and that's because there's a lot in methylation. Again, Gary really did a good job simplifying methylation. I think he radically oversimplified. But how much can you discuss on a 2-hour, 20-minute podcast with Joe Rogan? So I don't totally fault him. I wish he would just have filled it out a bit more, but you're only limited with so much time. So here's the bigger methylation map. Now, I will say that there are even more genes than these that are listed here. And you're looking at 15, 16 genes in total that are on this image. And there's even more that could be listed. And the genes that I've listed here, they're based off of very specific criteria, where there's at least, with the exception of AHCY, which I cut and pasted it into where it would be, because I don't normally test for AHCY, which is one of the five that Gary mentioned. The reason why is because less than 10% of the general population has an actual variation on them on AHCY that meaningfully would change what to do, because you don't want to test a gene that's 0.001% of the population. It's just so obscure. There's value for that 0.001%. that needs to have that gene checked, but for the general population, I don't think so. HCY is actually one of the most conserved genes in the entire mammalian lexicon of genes.
Mm.
It's one of the, the least amount. It's one of the most conserved out there. So, is it important? Absolutely, it wouldn't have been conserved otherwise. And the solution around any HCY is basically B3. So, if there is
Why
a
would he
concern,
test it if it's not kind of hierarchy?
well, because it's a different philosophical approach. Like HCY is important, and for the people, the few number of people that do have the variation, it's super important.
Mm.
But there's a threshold with the genetics tests that I use. There was a threshold decided that there has to be at least 10% of the general population that has to have the gene variation. Plus, there has to be enough research done on humans to show that nutrigenomic, epigenetic changes in lifestyle alone, lifestyle, diet, nutrition alone can change the expression of the gene, not a drug, but lifestyle, diet, nutrition. So there's several criteria that go into picking genes, and as a result, other genes aren't picked because they don't cross that threshold. Doesn't mean they're not important,
Mm.
but it just means they don't cross that threshold. If you're going to do a general test out to the public, I would want to make sure I test for really important genes that at least 10% of the population had the risk of variations of, that also had research done on humans, not wombats or nematodes,
Mm.
that showed that lifestyle, diet, nutrition alone will shift the expression of that gene in the direction we want.
Mm.
So there's tons of, look, there's not over, there's about, it's over 25,000. There's arguably 25 to 30,000 genes in the human lexicon of genetics.
Mhm.
The I only test for like 110 because those are the 110 that fall into those criteria
Yeah.
that relate to health.
Yeah.
So that they're the ones that have um
They're the
they're
ones
the
that most matter.
they're the ones that most matter. They're the ones that have the that address one, at least one of the 7 drivers of all diseases: inflammation, free radical damage scavenging, liver detox, vitamin D utilization, methylation, which is number 5, not number 1,
Mhm.
uh, cardiovascular, circulation, fat, energy, metabolism. I don't test for disease genes. I test for the genes that, if they go awry, drive and down and poke on the quote disease genes underneath them. So it's looking at a much higher level. So the genes have to be one of those 7 drivers. They have to be the generals of those genes. There's hundreds of genes that are involved directly and indirectly with inflammation,
Mm.
but there's only like 15 that are the top ones that control all the other ones underneath. Then you want to have the genes that have the variations within 10%, at least 20% of the population, and the ones that have the human-based research on, like we just described. So that of those 4 criteria, you boil down 30,000, 25, 30,000 genes down to like 100.
Mm.
And that's the level of analysis I look at, is the very high level, most important ones. Now, of the 5 Gary picked, 4 of them fall into that criteria. HCY did not. Doesn't mean HCY is not important, but it just didn't fulfill all those 4 criteria. So going through the whole methylation cycle, the primary focus on the methylation cycle is to deal with homocysteine. Now, homocysteine, Gary explained very well. I very much liked his explanation, that you've got this molecule will, if you don't keep recycling it back into a useful amino acid called methionine, it's going to cause a lot of damage along the cardiovascular system and then just kind of wreak havoc. Now, homocysteine is so bad for the body. The body literally has 3 ways to get rid of it. Normally, there's only like one process, at most 2,
Mm.
to like transfer something. I mean, I'm sure there's other biochemical pathways that have multiple ways to remove a thing, but to have 3 really intense ways to get rid of one thing is it shows you just how bad homocysteine is.
Mm.
So homocysteine can be taken through what's called the folate cycle, which was where Gary was focusing on. Which is, there's MTR, there's MTHFR. By the way, there's MTHFR1, there's MTHFR2. So
Mm.
there's actually another one that's right there. There's a second one there. So homocysteine goes through the folate cycle. And this is where, it's called the folate cycle because it needs folate. And folate, also B12, also B6, also B2. And there's other nutrients involved. I mean, he only touched on really the folate issue and the versus the folic acid. So homocysteine goes through the folate cycle, which is very efficient. It's the preferred method to go back to methionine, and then methionine then converts using SAMe, use through and then go through other genes like the comp gene, and SAMe becomes SAW, and then it passes through AHCY, and then it goes back into homocysteine, and then it can hopefully go through the folate cycle and just keeps spinning through. Now, if the folate cycle breaks down, there's an indirect pathway which uses BHMT, which basically uses trimethylglycine, which is another molecule that he described to quickly you use TMG is also called betaine, and which is made from choline, but the enzyme is zinc dependent. So choline and zinc are two very important things uh, to that are needed for that betaine or trimethylglycine dependent gene or enzyme. So the genes make the enzyme. That's what the genes are for. They make the enzyme to convert homocysteine back to methionine using this indirect pathway. You don't really want to use that pathway because you deplete your choline stores quickly. And you need your choline for many other things. But your
So
body
that's
wants
our
to.
backup pathway. If we are deficient in all the B vitamins, we've got this backup pathway.
Yeah, that's the backup pathway. And then there's the third pathway called the transsulfurase pathway or the CBS pathway. And that's where you use B6 and zinc and also several liver detox genes to convert homocysteine into taurine, hydrogen sulfide, and your friend and mine, glutathione. So homocysteine, interestingly enough, can actually have a pathway to convert into glutathione. So it's a complex cycle. It requires multiple different types of B vitamins. It requires a couple minerals. There's zinc in there. Magnesium is used in the COMT pathway as well. Iron is indicated in some other places as well. Different amino acids are used in different parts, like glycine and serine. Trimethylglycine betaine, we described that before. Choline. There's several important nutrients that are involved in this methylation pathway, and so to give a summary, the five genes that Gary mentioned, very important, no doubt about it. There's just some other ones that are there also that can be analyzed from a genetics perspective as well. And to limit yourself to just those five for $600, that's not to me that there's much more value you can get than that. And again, I appreciate his level of simplifying things down. So any questions or comments, Shemaine, that you had
Just
about this?
in kind of layman's terms, just to help people understand, because people do come to me with high homocysteine on their labs.
Mm-hmm.
If your homocysteine levels are pretty high, these three systems are not working that you
Well,
have to put into.
one of them or one or two of them are getting, they all work, but they one, like the folate cycle may be really out of whack, and the other ones are just struggling to keep up. Like they're supposed to be short-term things, especially
Yeah.
the indirect cycle.
Yeah, so
Um,
that was what I was alluding to, is that they're not working adequately, and that is going to be because of different environmental and epigenetic factors as well. So dare I say, if you have this high, you got to look at the bigger picture before you try to get too granular.
well, that's a perfect segue into the next segment, which is why would homocysteine be high in the first place?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue. So the next section we're going to cover is methylation is not the top priority in the body. Inflammation is.
Oh yeah.
So inflammation, and it's just there's a bunch of citations here for people if they're masochistic enough to go into the PubMed universe to look at the papers, but like literally how inflammation affects methylation. Like there's there's four citations here. And then
I'm
like
just gonna stop you there because you can make me sound better with my clients. Is if I had $1 for every time I spoke about inflammation, I would not be doing this anymore.
right.
To the general public, it's just an umbrella term of inflammation. Obviously, me and you understand the intricacies, but like no matter what you're trying to achieve in your body and health, you have to address inflammation first. It's present everywhere. You have to address it.
Right. And let me speak to inflammation then more specifically. What is it? What's the point of it? And why does it go on awry? The point, I always take things when in doubt, always go back to evolutionary biology. Always, 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 always to get a big picture understanding of why things are the way they are. That's my lens. If I'm ever confused, I go back to evolutionary biology and start there.
Mhm.
The point of inflammation is like cortisol. It's not bad for you. It's useful in acute situation to get you out of trouble than an immediate harsh emergency. It's really bad if it sticks around for a long time. That's inflammation. So the point of inflammation is, say I'm a hunter gatherer and I'm out with my hunting party and we're trying to take down an animal that's 30 times our body weight using a pointy stick. That's hunter-gatherer. We're going to take down a giant animal with a pointy stick. Now, there's a very high likelihood one or more of us is going to get bitten, mauled, gored, trampled, uh, or clawed, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, what happens if I'm bit? If I'm bit, what is a bite wound? It is a tissue damage, the rendering of flesh, of tissue damage.
Mm.
So there's physical damage to the
Yeah.
structure plus an injection of pathogens from the saliva and dirt in the teeth and whatever thing it just ate 20 minutes ago. So I now have an injection of infections plus tissue damage. The point of inflammation is the body sends in emergency repair to repair the damage. Those are red blood cells. And it sends in an emergency immune system. Those are called white blood cells to take out the infection. Now, you want to block off and wall off that area to prevent the infection from spreading, and you have to shut down what's happening in order to repair it. Like you look at a building in any big city that's doing repair, there's like scaffolding all around it. Like it is partially functional, it is a mess. And it's just, you got to just do all of this stuff. You got to expand the outside to then work on it and repair it, get all the junk out of it, whatever happened to it. So, so inflammation is there to heal and to disinfect. That's the whole point of it. But the problem is when something is inflamed, you lose its function. So that the building doesn't function as well anymore. What if you have hepatitis, your liver is now not functioning because it's inflamed. It's on fire. Like if you have pancreatitis, like your pancreas is on fire. You have an emergency you're dealing with. It's not working because it's dealing with all these other things. Your elbow, if it swells up from a bite wound, it's not working properly because it's needing to repair and deal with the potential infection. So that's the point of inflammation. Now, for people like me who genetically are over-inflammers, I had an evolutionary advantage as a hunting party member to survive short-term injury during the hunt compared to my lesser inflamed party members at the expense of long-term chronic issues from being hypersensitive to over-inflaming.
Mhm.
But my less inflammatory prone hunting members, if they didn't die from a hunting accident, they were going to live longer because they were less inflammatory prone. So that's the trade-off. That's how evolutionary biology works. Evolution does not give one hoot about me. It
Mhm.
gives a hoot about my lineage.
Yeah.
And it makes sure the lineage survives by throwing these little gambles out across multiple people in the same lineage. And you're a little more inflammatory prone, you're a little less inflammatory prone. You detox estrogen more readily, you detox estrogen less readily, which is a good thing if you're in a fat-starved environment where calories are hard to come by. So you want to hold on to your estrogen with two hands as opposed to readily getting rid of this precious, expensive estrogen. But if you're in a high calorie environment, you should get, you want to be able to process it out more, because otherwise it can accumulate and have estrogen not dominant issues. Like, you can go through line item by line item and go through the evolutionary trade-offs in order to ensure the lineage survives. Nature has ensured there's a variety of different genetic expressions that all recombine through sexual reproduction at every generation, and you just create a new combo out for the lineage to keep going. That's the whole point of inflammation, and that's why people have, quote, bad inflammatory genes. They're not bad. I don't have bad genes, even though my inflammatory genes are terrible. I'm
They're not
misplaced.
bad, they're terrible.
Well, no, they're terrible for this environment at this point in time in human
Yes.
history.
Mhm.
They're perfect for a high injury prone Paleolithic hunter-gatherer environment. I would have survived way better, way
Than
better.
me, because I'm like not hypersensitive to inflammation at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
But again, I was going to elaborate on that for the viewers before you got to it, is what Sam is talking about is back in Paleolithic times. We are not in Paleolithic times now, so the more inflammatory issues you're having now, the bigger problems it's going to be in the long term.
Yeah, it's a mismatch. I mean, there's even a book by that title called Mismatch, which talks about the mismatch of our genes as hunter-gatherers versus the genes of us pushing around a grocery cart, you know.
Like
And
time has moved faster than our genes have.
correct. Absolutely. Culture and technology. It's really technology that has expanded faster. There's like, there's different views of history. There's the quote great man thesis, and then there's the big cultural shifts thesis. You've got these big singular characters like Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great, or whoever, that we seem so major decisions happen, and then you've got like the big cultural movements that happen. But then there's a third theory, which I ascribe to, is it's really changes in technology that then the big movements and the singular individuals in history leverage to make the big shifts. It's really technological shifts that drive history into their different epochs. So we have Paleolithic genes in a space age technology environment, and that's the mismatch. So uh, going just kind of bring this back down to what's practical.
Mhm.
You want to get your genes for inflammation checked in addition, not to exclusion of, in addition to the methylations, because the inflammatory genes are the most important ones. And here's the 15 most important ones based on those criteria. Interleukin 1, there's 3 interleukin 1s, interleukin 6, interleukin 8, interleukin 18, TNF alpha, 3 CRP genes, which are the acute phase inflammation proteins in the liver, 2 COX genes, COX, and then the anti-inflammatory genes, the 3 interleukin 10s. Those are the most
Let me just
important.
stop you for 1 second. Here in Canada, most doctors are testing CRP, but it's just CRP. Which one are they testing? 1, 2, or 3, do you think?
It's usually if they're testing and they just say it's the one, it's usually the -1 of the individual genes. Usually there is the RS code underneath, which you can be definitive about it. Like, we don't want to get lost in the hieroglyphics and hexadecimals of all these gene these gene designation names, but this is a problem because there are multiple variations of different types of genes, and the nomenclature does get overly complex. So that's why the RS designations, which are very long, we're talking, it's basically the area code and phone number of the gene to dial in exactly what gene you're looking at. So the most famous ones on here are interleukin 6 and TNF alpha, because they're major keystones of the inflammatory pathway. The most important ones, I believe, are the interleukin. Like these are all the most important of these 15, the most important. But the most important, in my opinion, are actually the interleukin 10s. They're the ones that put out the fires of inflammation. So even if you have a small campfire, but you have no way of putting it out, it's going to leave a burn scar. So the interleukin 10s, it's like, do you have a fire hose to put out your inflammation, or do you have a little squirt gun?
Yeah.
So that's inflammation, and inflammation controls methylation. Like, if your house is on fire, you need to deal with the fire, not with everything else. Then we have the oxidative stress has control over methylation. So oxidative stress is free radicals. So what free radicals are, and I'm just pulling a direct quote out of one of these papers. Quote, oxidative stress on complex traits and disease may be partly mediated through changes in epigenetic markers, e.g. DNA methylation, meaning this is nerd speak for oxidative stress causes problems by screwing up methylation. It's not the other way around.
Yeah.
It's not methylation causes oxidative stress. It's the oxidative stress causes methylation problems. So the now there is some level of bidirectionality in these things, and that this is it's I guess my statement wasn't entirely true. That methylation problems don't cause oxidative stress. That's not entirely true. But the what Gary left out was there's other things that control methylation, and dealing with free radicals is one of them. And what I wanted to put here was this is out of the book Switched On, and it's showing how free radicals work. And they're the most important place to quench free radicals is in the mitochondria. So 95% mitochondria is where, and Gary talked about the energy production that you can get either 2 ATP or 36 ATP if you have if your mitochondria is working. If it's not working, you get 2 units of ATP. He made a slight mathematical error. He said, 16, you get 16 times the amount of energy. 2 to 36 is technically 18, not 30, not 16. Also, the liver, and this is a pedantic point. So like this is ultra pedantic, and the liver actually you can get 38 units of energy in the mitochondria because the liver has got an extra bonus thing going on with its mitochondria to get an extra 2 units of ATP. But that's
Yeah.
It's kind of a non necessarily salient point. What is salient is that in order to make all that energy, and I have a whole separate podcasts on explaining mitochondria, and this we don't have another 30 minutes to go through
Yeah,
all the
I can
mitochondria.
send them to me and I'll link them up for people who
Okay.
want to go down the rabbit hole.
Thank you. So basically, mitochondria, think of mitochondria as an electricity factory, and the factory is a wonderful metaphor. Mitochondria factory. So a factory needs walls. We call those sphingolipids. The factory needs machines. These are vitamins. The factory needs computer chips to run those machines. Those are called minerals.
Mm.
The I think when I gesturing with my hand, Zoom picked up that I was raising my hand to ask a question. That's
Like in school.
all this AI stuff in Zoom is all the rage at the moment. Anyway, so you've got minerals, which are the computer chips that run the machines. You've got conveyor belts that help move things along. That's like CoQ10 and also the little inner membrane. And CoQ10 is actually a massive molecule. It's enormous molecularly. Then you've got security guards, like the immune system to keep the infections and vandals from screwing it up. And then you've got to have janitors that clean the place up and make sure that sparks don't fly everywhere and set the place on fire. And that's what the free radical scavengers are doing. MN-SOD, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. This glutathione peroxidase, catalase, and superoxide dismutase. Those are the 3 janitors. And MN-SOD, MN stands for manganese, or I call him Mr. SOD because the head janitor. Mr. SOD is the head janitor. And you need to have the head janitor has to take the 2 superoxide radicals, and then it takes 2 of them and it combines into hydrogen peroxide, and then glutathione peroxidase and catalase then take those two of those hydrogen peroxides and converts into oxygen and water, which is amazing. And Gary actually alluded to this, that you actually generate what did he say? It was like 100 gallons of water a day in your system.
Water. Yeah.
Metabolic water. And this is metabolic water. Like you make your body weight in ATP a day. 10% of your body weight is mitochondria. This is metabolic water. This is how your body makes water in the cells.
Kind of like the
So
camels, how the camels do it.
right. I haven't interviewed a camel recently, but I don't I didn't realize that they
It's next up on my list. So the camel's humps are filled with fat, not actually water. And when they break down the fat, it becomes metabolic water.
Okay, got it. I didn't know
So
that.
metabolic water is one of the byproducts of breaking down fat cells, even in humans.
Okay, yeah, that's correct. So I didn't realize that can't that that's how camels did. That's very clever. Yeah, definitely interview a camel for your next book.
I'll let you
Ask him how that's done. Uh, so uh the point of this is I'm showing you the three most important genes for free radical scavenging, because these are the three main janitors in the mitochondria that generate 95% of all free radicals in the human body. 95%. So and it's free radicals, like I showed before. It's free radicals that can really screw up methylation. So I would want to know the top three genes that control free radical damage if I'm very concerned about methylation, because these three would influence the methylation.
Mm,
The next thing is vitamin D utilization. So there's vitamin D, and I just released a whole bunch of videos on my YouTube channel on understanding the vitamin D pathway.
awesome.
And also a video of Mr. Sod. I actually got a little picture from Canva of this happy janitor. I was very happy to see that and put it
I'm
in the
gonna
video.
check that out.
Yeah. Um, and so the vitamin D utilization has its own control over methylation. And so vitamin D, and Gary even said this, vitamin D is the most, and I agree with him 100%. Vitamin D is the most important nutrient in the human body, in my opinion, next to like water.
Mm,
Like it's vitamin D is the most important vitamin. It controls, it's estimated between 3 and 5% of your entire genome.
yeah.
3 to 5%. That is for one thing. It is so important. I've actually debated with the genetic scientists who put all these panels together about why are the vitamin D receptors considered priority 27 and 28 when I think they should be priority 1 and 2. And the reason why I say that is because what I've noticed in doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these genetics tests is that the people who struggle the most with chronic illness and chronic diseases, with only one exception in my entire career,
It's vitamin
they
D.
all had double reds or double yellows in their vitamin D VDR genes. And the person with the double greens had horrific stress in their life, like death of a child, and which is probably the worst stress any parent can possibly go through. Uh, and and of course they would develop, and totally understandable rather why they would develop something chronic with that level of stress. And everyone else was like straight up double reds, double yellows, mostly double reds. And I went back to Dr. Beaver, and who put this together. By the two interviews of him on my website as well, on my YouTube channel as well. If people want to be super nerdy and talk to the guy who put this panels together, um, the I asked him. I said, "Look, Dr. Beaver, I see a pattern. I've
Mm,
seen enough people to see it to call it a pattern. Please go back and check the database, and go check your other top genetic clinicians, because they've got the numbers to actually see patterns. I want you to see if double red VDRs, especially double reds, have a correlation with chronic illness." He got back to me in a couple months and he said, "You're absolutely right. There's absolutely a pattern of the double reds," and that's why when it was a collegial argument, at the genetics seminar, I was seeing this pattern years before I was seeing it emerge, and I said, like, I think there's something here. But then I came back to him a while later after I had way more tests to back up my hypothesis. So
Are you aware of the recent research around vitamin D3 deficiencies and COVID outcomes? If I can find it, if you haven't seen it, I can find it and get it to you. Basically, showing that people with the worst COVID outcomes were vitamin D deficient. And when it came to the comorbidities that we heard about, the comorbidities were being driven through the vitamin D deficiency.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I knew me and my colleagues in functional medicine were talking about this in mid 2020,
Yeah.
like way, 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 way early on. And when you look at Italy, you know, they got tragically hit with a lot of deaths. And when you look at Italy, like everyone smokes, and one of the number one things to screw up the VDR receptors on the surface of your cells is smoking.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the number one ways to withdraw your ability to use vitamin D is to smoke. And so when you look at the comorbidities, you look at people who have less exposure to the sun, whether it's they're not outside, they have darker melanin, or culturally they wear way, way, way more clothing
Mm-hmm.
to wrap themselves up for cultural religious reasons. They're much, much higher comorbidities because of the lack of not only of synthesis of vitamin D from the sun, also maybe dietary restrictions culturally, they're not eating foods that have high vitamin D, but also getting vitamin D into your blood is half the game. Getting it from the blood into the cells is the other half.
Yeah.
And that's where the VDRs come in. VDRs is the receptor. It's the docking site for vitamin D to actually dock on the cell and enter into the cell to navigate and stimulate the genes to deal with primarily inflammation and infection. That's the primary role of vitamin D, is to deal with inflammation and infection. Yeah, bones too, but that's not the priority. The priority is to deal with inflammation and infection. So,
And it has a direct impact on mitochondria function as well.
absolutely. I mean, vitamin D, I mean, it's like if it affects 3 to 5% of your DNA of your DNA, and the bulk of that is dealing with inflammation and infection, the ramifications are just staggering. I mean, even some of the other components that vitamin D does, like it keeps the tight junctions of the colonocytes tight. They're literally called tight junctions to keep the cells that line the colon tightly knit together so nothing leaks through. Like literally the leaky gut, you know, one of the causes of leaky gut is low vitamin D,
Yeah.
because your gut can't stay stitched together. So vitamin D has its own control over methylation. And so I would want to know, if I am so concerned about methylation, I would want to know my VDR genes, like, for sure. I mean, if it were me, I would want to know my VDR genes more than the inflammatory genes, hence the argument with Dr. Beaver. But so this is just another example of things that are superordinate to methylation. And then lastly, I want to talk about detoxification.
Mm.
Over It has its own control over methylation. Now, here's an example, like as a direct quote here, environmental toxins such like toxic metals can alter epigenetic regulatory features such as DNA methylation, histone modification, and non-coding RNA expression. Heavy metals influence gene expression by epigenetic mechanisms and by directly binding to various metal responsive elements in target gene promoters. Okay, so this is a lot of
Jargon.
there's a lot of words. There's a lot of genetic word salad here to um, to talk about how toxic. If you can't detox toxic metals, it's going to screw up methylation. Now, remember what I said in the mitochondria. You need minerals that are computer chips to run the machines inside the factory. One of the ways that heavy metals are so damaging is that they swap out the heavy metals, swap out the minerals in it's a lesser computer chip to go into the machine. So it's like trying to run a 2024 MacBook Pro with a 1997 Mac chip.
Yeah.
It's not going to work even remotely
So I
as
spoke
well.
about this yesterday for my followers who are kind of understand what you're getting at. Molecular mimicry, that the heavy metals can, and vice versa, they can displace each other. If you have,
Yes, displace. That's the right word. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. They displace
yeah.
the minerals in for the machines. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a big pusher of minerals, mineral water, because people get obsessed with heavy metal detoxes and they overthink a lot of it, and for the general population it's too complicated if we can approach it simpler. So one of the ways I was discussing that was through mineral displacement. If you can flood your body with good minerals, we can help displace some of these bad heavy metal minerals.
Yeah, there's many different theories when it comes to detox. So many. And I'll just list off a couple of them. One is they're metal bad, get rid of immediately, urgently. So it's the get rid of the metals philosophy. Then there's the let's give the body all the nutrient, let's flood all the body with all the nutrients it needs
Mm.
to make things sufficient and let the metals and the toxins be displaced slowly over time as opposed to forcing the issue.
Yeah.
And then there's other theories on, well, let's improve the exits, the exit rows
Mhm.
to not necessarily push metals out the door faster and exceed someone's metabolic capacity. But if the metals are trying to leave and the doors are blocked, well, that's not the metal's fault.
Yeah.
You know, let's not try to pull the metals out through a really tiny exit door. Let's just open the door much bigger. So you have people that focus on lymphatic drainage first, or then you have people that focus on just using lots of binders in the gut first to help remove the burden, and kind of use binders as a third kidney. So you poop things out as opposed to try to metabolize them through the gut, through the blood system, through the liver and kidneys and out. You just try to bypass that. So those are three major theories around detox. And where, I mean, as long as we're here, like, where do I stand? I stand on, well, it's case dependent. So it really depends on someone's resilience and their timeline. If they have very high resilience, uh, and they are really keen on getting rid of things quickly, then you can do the let's remove things. Like if they're already pretty sufficient and they're sturdy, then doing the let's just remove things quickly approach, that can work with possibly some blowback called a Herxheimer reaction. Now Herxing out, what a Herx reaction out is, like we're literally looking at the detoxification panel right here. What Herxing out is when your phase 1 exceeds your phase 2.
Hmm.
So the best way to understand detox is it's a washer dryer system. I learned this from one of my mentors, Dr. Kalish. It's a washer dryer system. So when you have dirty clothes, I vague memory we talked about this on the last podcast.
Maybe.
Uh, maybe. So
The
the
last
washer
podcast was 90 minutes. We spoke about a lot.
we covered a lot of stuff. Okay. So the washer dryer system is so you have a dirty t-shirt, you put it in the washer, and it's now wet and rinsed off, but now you have to put it in the dryer quickly, because if you don't, you just keep it wet, it's going to get moldy and it's going to be worse than if you hadn't washed it in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's the exact thing that's going on with phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is the washer, phase 2 is the dryer. You actually have 6 dryers. There's methylation, acetylation, methionation, glutathione, glycination. There's one more I'm blanking on, but it'll come back to me at 2 a.m. this morning, whatever. What will happen is that if your dryers aren't clear to go, if they're jammed, if they're full, if the dryers are broken, if they're lacking the amino acids or whatever, if they're lacking the amino acids, or they're preoccupied, or they're overwhelmed, or something else, and you just put all this wet laundry in and there's no place to dry it, then those toxins, the toxins that go into phase 1, they're actually more dangerous after phase 1, because now they're like really, that they're made into what's called an oxide radical. They're made more reactive so that the amino acids in phase 2 can glom onto them, and now these toxins are now heavier and can be pooped out and gotten rid of, because the liver throws bile, detoxes, puts in the bile, puts in the gallbladder, and the gallbladder ejects bile into the small intestine, excuse me, to then be traversed out as poop. And so that's how your body will get rid of a huge chunk of its toxins. The other way is major ways through the kidneys.
But this
So
is why, for those listening, this is why it's such a huge problem when people have severe constipation. And I mean severe, like more than I have some clients that don't go for like up to 8 weeks, and I keep saying this is a big problem, but the gas.
That's do you sure they don't have Hirschsprungs?
Well, I've spoke to them about it, and I've said, look, your gastroenterologist is not taking this serious enough because this is going to be very problematic. There's also autoimmune issues there, which I believe are being driven by this retoxification all the time.
Yeah, so if someone hasn't pooped in 8 weeks, like that's actually that's like like that may be Hirschsprung's. I mean, for people who don't know, that Hirschsprung's is a genetic condition where you lack the kind of rubber band like elasticity of the gut, and stuff just kind of, the colon just kind of balloons and doesn't actually push back to contract to poop things out. Um, wow, that's 8 weeks of crazy long time.
It's not like totally uncommon. Like I hear I've heard it from a few people. It's not but even even if we were to reduce that time frame, anything more than 3 days, starting to have some problems there.
Totally. So people can herx out or have a Herxheimer reaction if they don't have enough of the amino acids if the dryers aren't working. So people exceed their ability to detox, it creates a problem. So long and the short of it, the detoxification is dealing toxins in a poor detoxification capacity also can affect methylation. Now, and also methylation is one of the detox pathways. So this is a bidirectional thing. Like there is a back and forth here. So the last thing, one of the last things I wanted to cover here. Um, one thing I forgot to mention earlier on. I wanted to just publicly thank Dr. Fortuno, who's a geneticist, and she's the one who helped me collate a lot of these research articles.
Mhm.
Uh, and she did the vast majority of I collaborated with her for this presentation. I found one of them, but she found the rest of them, and just want to really appreciate her diligence. I'm more viewed as like the communicator, not the researcher.
Yeah.
I just want to appreciate her publicly, Dr. Fortuno.
Thank you.
The other genes I want to mention was just the AHCY. Now, sorry, it's not Doctor, Gary talks about AHCY as a mood-based gene. Now, the reason why AHCY is not involved in this particular research, in this panel of 110 genes, is because there's a lack of general research. There's a general lack of research on the impact of the variants as opposed to other genes in the same pathway. HCY is highly conserved, so it's very unlikely there's a variant in it in the first place. And B3 is a major cofactor which people should be taking in their multivitamin anyway. So there's not like some major thing to do
Yeah.
aside from the obvious, which you'd be doing anyway. And we'd want to focus on other genes that have real consequences in the wider public, that something can really be done about it. MAOA, and we're talking about mood, MAOA and COMT are way more investigated and important
Mhm.
for
For
mood
sure.
issues. And so I wanted to show like what like MAOA. So there's MAOA 1, there's MAOA 2. Now, this is one of those cases where green dot, red dot actually doesn't mean green good, red bad. It means you have different risk profiles associated with. So I'll show you an example of, here's a green dot MAOA1 and a red dot MAOA2. And a green dot MAO1 is, increased risk of reduced spatial memory, addiction, and worse response to antidepressant drugs, amongst other things. Red dot MAOA2 is increased risk of aggression, aggressive traits, and basically more prone to anger. Whereas a red dot in MAO1 is like depression, OCD, panic attacks, ADHD, schizophrenia, and chronic fatigue syndrome risks. Whereas a green dot in MAO2 is that it's lower risk of aggressive traits. Now there's a and so there's basically 4 different quads. You can have 2 green dots in MAOA1 and 2. You can have a green red, you can have a red green, you can have 2 reds. So there's 4 different things, combinations. Now this is one particular combination I wanted to point out, which is very, 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 very important. People who have a red dot MAOA1 and a green dot MAOA2 have an extremely problematic relationship with alcohol. Like, these are your violent drunks. violent. Like these people must absolutely stay away from alcohol at all costs, even though ironically it says you're less prone to anger, asterisk alcohol.
Mm.
Okay, so this is a combination that as a public service announcement for people who are super nerdy on their genes or they want to get their genes tested, you must stay away from alcohol if you have this combination. So so people looking for mood genes, there's better options than AHCY.
And there we go
So,
back to our vitamin D again as well for this,
mhm,
like, playing an important role there.
absolutely, yeah. So the things that help all MAOA1, all of them is exercise and stress management. All of them. There's some other extra things that can be done for some other variant combinations, like vitamin D and quercetin for MAOA-2 if it's a green.
Mm.
So, uh, so these are the genes. This is kind of the big picture stuff I wanted to cover. That the 5 genes Gary talked about, they're very important. He explained them extremely well, but it's insufficient. There's about a dozen more methylation genes to really look at, and to also understand that inflammation controls methylation, oxidative stress or free radicals control methylation, vitamin D controls methylation, and then there's a relationship with detoxification. It's bidirectional that also influences methylation. That we really need, if we're very concerned about methylation, we really need to look at the bigger picture lifestyle, environmental, and genetic factors that are superordinate to just those 5 methylation genes. Do you have any questions or any comments or the things you wanted to chat about those particular concepts
Well,
before I go?
that was awesome. It was very I don't think it was too nerdy. I think that was pretty good, although I'm a nerd
Now
too.
my feelings are hurt. Okay.
But I am a nerd too, so
Yeah, but I got the glasses to prove it.
so there was I maybe off topic, but I'm just curious with the test that Gary is doing. If you were limited to 5, what 5 would you pick?
Oh, that's a great question. I would pick. Oh, if I were limited to 5. Wow. Okay, so I guess my question, 5 for overall health or for a specific thing?
Let's go with overall health because if you're healthy, the body composition is going to follow.
Okay, I would pick, if I only had 5, I would pick VDR1, because that VDR1 I've found to, if VDR2 follows VDR1 in almost every case I've seen.
Mm.
So I would pick VDR1. I would pick interleukin 10-1 because that's the one that's the most, why am I getting balloons now across?
Because that was the right answer.
That was the right answer. Why can't
You win a
Zoom?
prize.
Zoom AI is messing with me. I feel like Skynet is taking over. All right.
Yeah.
I would pick VDR1. I would pick interleukin 10-1. I would pick interleukin 6. I would pick TNF alpha,
Mm.
and I would pick MN SOD.
Yeah, Mr. Sod.
I meant Mr. SOD. Those would be the 5. And look, it's a real, like, I would throw Compton there as like number 6.
Yeah.
I would put Compton because it so influences people's mood
Mm.
and their quality of life. I think from like an overall, what will affect everything the most,
Mental.
those would be the 5 if you had to pick 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not that VDR2 isn't important, it's that I can get the information I need from VDR1.
Yeah. They
Almost
kind
all
of
the
work in tangent.
time. Pretty much. I wouldn't need VDR2 to corroborate VDR1.
Yeah. That was the one thing through the conversation, I was like, what 5 would he pick then? Because I'm gonna make my own test and I'm gonna
All
use
right. You're gonna make your own chest and start at 600 like Gary is. Okay. What will be your 5? I'm curious.
well, definitely the ILs. CRP, I've always liked the CRP tests. COMT, because you see COMT issues a lot in women, especially cycling women, and
Yeah.
mental health. If you don't have your mental health, the ability to make other lifestyle choices are going to be pretty tough there.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Sod, because you convinced me that he is one of the primary catalysts that we need working in our favor.
It tickles me when people are now first person to now proactively say Mr. Sod on my thing. That I feel very seen. Thank you.
You need to trademark it. It's like I have a term fairy dust and everybody uses it now, like when I'm
Okay.
thinking about nutrition.
Right.
But these words help people understand more.
Right.
And then probably, like you said, because of the importance of the MAO, probably testing that because of the violence that we're seeing in society nowadays. Maybe that would be a good test just to.
Well, it would be, but the solution, so just to go into I had a period of my life where I was studying the nature of violence, partly because I experienced a lot of it growing up. And there is one variable that can reduce overnight 50% of all murders, all rapes, and all violence
Mm,
across the entire world, and that's alcohol.
yeah.
If you just got rid of alcohol, 50% of all of those things would be gone. So
But
and
then
the idea,
can you tell me then why were all the off licenses and liquor stores allowed to stay open when everything else was closed?
well, that's
That's a different rabbit.
that's just lobbying. That's not who. And I don't think there's anyone under the illusion that the liquor stores are open for health reasons.
Hmm.
The it's yeah. I mean that's a much wider, frankly, more depressing conversation. But the idea of that there's a culture of violence, that we live in a culture of violence, or it's on school camps a culture of violence. It's like, no, it's a culture of alcohol.
Yeah.
And that if your culture of violence is 50% of that is literally statistically tied to one thing, don't call it that culture of something else. Call it the culture of that thing
Mhm.
that accounts for 50% of the thing you think it is.
Yeah.
So that would be the first step. And I think there's a level of, the problem is that when people are drunk, they they know what they're doing is wrong. That's the thing. They just don't have the inhibition. They don't have the ability to inhibit the action of doing it. They still know it's wrong,
Hmm.
but they just don't have their frontal lobes activated to stop it from happening. So lecturing people of how you're creating a culture of violence, lecturing people how bad it is, doesn't stop the people who drink from doing it, because the alcohol doesn't, the moralizing doesn't stop the behavior.
Yeah. Are you still there? Looks like we have frozen. I don't know if that's your end or my end. Oh, you're back.
I'm back. Oh,
Yeah. I don't know if
okay.
it was you or me. Totally froze there.
Okay. Maybe Skynet was
So the mom
upset.
is talking
Hey,
about alcohol.
it's talking about alcohol. I know. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Skynet. You can go
But
have
not
your.
only the violence aspect for our followers, like, and I'm sure you agree with me, like alcohol in itself is going to slow down detoxification of hormones. It's going to affect how your body burns body fat, how you lose weight.
I haven't published it yet, but I have. One of the things I've done is that the genetics program that I run, I'm completing a online course, an online DIY self-directed genetics course, so people can get their results.
That's pretty cool.
And then like it's I've developed this in the year since we've spoken.
Mm.
I've created a program that people can get their 110 genes, and then they get their custom report around what to do. And then if they want to go super nerdy, they can go into the individual genes or gene patterns in the back end and really dive deep. And I spent 20 minutes. I have one of the one of the panels I run is understanding your trigger foods.
Yeah.
And trigger foods includes some genes on alcohol detoxification. And just on that alone, one of the videos on alcohol is 20 minutes, where I talk about the entire history and socio-political, like the entire reason why alcohol is around, and the dangers of alcohol metabolically, and that's just one of those videos. So if people want like a complete genetics education according to their individual genetic readout, not of 5 genes, but of like 110-ish,
Mm.
and then I would recommend like investing in doing this kind of DIY program. And there's
When
even
will
other.
that be available?
It's available now, and
Okay.
so it's the course is I've recorded 80 of the 130 something videos, so
Yeah.
there's plenty to do in the meantime, and then it's just it's being built out, so people are getting what they're getting a price right now, which is not, we're in the full course because it's in development.
Yeah.
They're getting kind of reduced rate, but there's still
That's
plenty of
good.
stuff to do. And so with the genetics that I offer, it's a package of 6 actual tests. There's the Achieve Your Natural Weight, which covers the the 7 drivers: the inflammation, free radical damage, liver detox, oxidative stress, or that's the free radical damage, methylation, vitamin D receptors, cardiovascular circulation, and the fat and energy metabolism. This is also the one where if you're concerned about the genetic fault lines you've inherited, this will tell you what are the drivers you need to shore up and exactly how to address them. The
Mm.
Find Your Ideal Diet, that's the one that looks at, are you keto, Mediterranean, paleo, or high carb? Trigger foods look at your reactions to coffee, gluten, alcohol, salt, histamine, caffeine, and food triggers. Vitamin D absorption, like can you actually utilize your ability to synthesize vitamin D from the sun? Immunity genes like vitamin C, zinc, and other inflammatory genes. And then eating behaviors, like are you genetically wired to overeat, overcrave sugar, overconsume sugar, avoid bitter foods? This there's lots and lots in all of there's lots of great information in all these different panels, and they're all done together to create a synergy. And I would really strongly recommend people, if they want to invest in genes, then invest in not 5 methylation genes, but in 110, of which includes like 15, 16 methylation genes and all these other things as well.
I know
Uh,
people are going to ask is a lot of my followers are based out of Canada. Are you saliva testing for
no,
this?
they're cheek swab. It's cheek swab.
Yeah.
So it's a really simple, super simple cheek swab. And it can be done in like a minute on each side of the cheek and you're done.
Awesome.
And then it's sent off to the lab. And also uh, for your viewers and listeners, I've got a couple ebooks. One is on biohacking on the 10 pillars of health, which and functional testing. And I have 2 books on genetics. One on the full all the different panels we talked about, and one is specifically on how you can genetically determine your optimal diet using this very system. So one of the things Gary didn't cover was how to know what diet you should have based on your genetics.
Yeah, he
He
gives you nutrient tips, but not specifics.
Yeah, so I would want to know if I'm genetically optimally suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb. I want to know my relationship to histamines, my relationship to salt, my relationship to caffeine. I have the gene for caffeine-induced anxiety and depression, which is
Which
really
sucks for
important.
you.
Yeah, I had bulletproof coffee ever, and I was a jittery mess. And I was conflating anxiety with energy.
I
Particularly for
wonder
the
if you paired it with like 6 grams of glycine or something. Maybe you could.
I tried. Okay, let me give you what I put in this thing. I made I my coffee had, first of all, like all organic, the mold free,
Single
blah blah.
estate, yeah.
I, okay, I put in coconut oil, coconut milk, cardamom, clove, turmeric, burdock, uh, cinnamon, um, uh, there's like 3 other things or 4 other things, amino acids, and salt. Um, I had the recipe I made somewhere. Man, when I made it, it was like this cacao. I put in cacao. It was like this
It's like a
Moroccan.
meal.
It was like a food group. It was like this chai Moroccan mochaccino, like
Bar.
bliss bomb.
Yeah.
But I was the caffeine just so I had a red dot in the CYP A1A2 and the Adora 2 something 1, 2 1 R1. I can't remember the exact designation. Um, I cannot do caffeine. I just can't do it. I don't care how much I buffer it with all these spices and fats and amino acids. I'm just a mess. So I had to switch to an adaptogenic adrenal tea
Yeah.
that tasted 80% like coffee. I put in dandelion and burdock as well into that.
That like those everything else bar the burdock and now dandelion sounds great, but burdock is so strong in its flavor in a way.
Well, I have a few other flavors to mask it with in my little
So how are you
thing.
with decaf? Because decaf still has like 4% of the caffeine.
Decaf is better, but I'm just better off not. I'm super sensitive to caffeine. I just can't. I just really can't. It's really frustrating.
I'm
Um,
sorry. I'll drink the caffeine for you because I'm
that's
fine.
so generous for you. I'll just osmose the
I
energy of.
wonder if that has something to do with your inflammation sensitivities as well, though, because d- the only time I'm sensitive to inflammation really is around my menses. Otherwise, I'm like, I push down inflammation very, very well. Like stress is a trigger for me, but I can tolerate caffeine well. So I wonder if there's some sort of correlation there.
So, I'm very pro-inflammatory, and I'm sure that there's if I'm inflamed, then it's going to globally, like, inflammation is superordinate to detoxification. So it's not just inflammation superordinate to methylation. Inflammation is superordinate to detoxification. And the analogy, my favorite analogy is like if you have overflowing garbage in your kitchen, but your stove is on fire, what's the priority?
Yeah.
What's the priority? It's putting out the fire, you know? So like if I'm inflamed, then all my detox pathways are messed up. And if my caffeine detox pathway is already compromised, it's going to be extra special compromised.
Yeah.
So I think um it's multifaceted, but for sure I'm just my Adora 2A1 gene is just super red, and I just can't. There's two main genes. There's the CYP1A2 and the Adora 2A1 that are involved directly with caffeine sensitivity, and I just can't do it. So
I'm
again,
gonna
you enjoy. I will have coffee, whatever. What's it called? Coffee compersion? I don't know. Uh, if you enjoy your coffee, and I'll just sit here and mope. Um,
you can live vicariously through me.
right.
So
Or mope.
there's one question I'm going to ask now because I know my listeners, I know them well, and I
Yeah.
know they're going to ask this. Would you say then that's across the board, people who are more pro-sensitive to inflammation are going to have more caffeine issues?
I'd say people who are sensitive to inflammation are going to have more problems to all things,
Mm.
and that are a burden of this modern world that we're not because we're in a mismatch of our environment. So you're going to be more sensitive to you're going to be more sensitive to foods that are artificial or processed. You're going to be more sensitive to all the extra environmental particulate in the air that didn't exist, except in the regions where there's a lot of volcanic activity or an asteroid hit within the recent
Mm.
enough that you could have lived, but the dust plume didn't kill you off all outright, but just hung in the air. Or forest fires from whatever that wafted over into your region.
It's a lot.
Um, so there are I mean, look, there are people that went through a bottleneck of selective pressure that have, you know, hundreds or even 1,000-fold X increase in their capacity to get rid of toxins because they were in an evolutionary bottleneck because they were next to a volcano.
Mm.
Their tribe just survived there, and the people who were sensitive to the metals died,
Yeah.
and the other ones, the lineage lived on that were able to detox. So there is also, I would say globally, I would say yes, and people who are inflammatory prone would have more problems with caffeine, and as long as everything else, along with
And
everything
everything
else.
else. Yeah. Well, Sam, it's not often that I say this conversation was epic. I think it's very understandable, but this conversation has been epic. Like so many takeaways to this. Okay, it was nerdy, but it wasn't too nerdy. I think people.
Hurting my feelings, Shameen. Oh my God.
It's all right. I'll send you some dandelion tea in the post.
The least Zoom could do is pop up a nerd emoji just by my face showing up on camera. Like I feel so unseen by Skynet right
I
now.
don't even know what those things were. That was the first time I've seen them, and I do a lot
So
of these.
so what happens is I gesture a lot. So what happens is that like the AI thingy in Zoom is I know we can test all this out. We can make, funny faces or whatever. Um, the Zoom, unless you turn the feature off, it'll automatically set your hand gestures to create. I mean, look, I just have to put it on my standard operating procedure before I get on a podcast to shut that thing off, so I don't throw
It's
balloons
never
out.
happened before.
I think it's an update. It's a very recent update to Zoom, and I don't know if the US has a different
Maybe.
Zoom update
I don't
schedule
know.
compared to
Yeah.
other parts of the world.
That goes back to what we are saying, like technology is well ahead of us.
Right. I get very uncomfortable when my Instapot is smarter than I am.
Look, I don't even know what an Instapot is, so there you go. Okay, this has been really, really awesome. And I'm going to share those videos. I took note when you were talking of the vitamin D videos you have, because I think people are going to be interested in them. Uh, Coincidentally enough, before our call, I did a group call with my group on D3 and K2 and just
Huh?
kind of discussing that. So we're on the same frequency. But it's not working for me. So, but
Right.
thank you for this. Thank you for agreeing to come back on. This was awesome. So, and no doubt when I'll share it with you and you share it wherever you want, because
Absolutely. Thank
this,
you.
I think I've listened to a lot of your stuff, but this is some of your best stuff. So
Thank
great
you.
way to.
And it was, and I thank you for inviting me on. And again, my extend my greatest appreciation to Dr. Fortuno, who helped ferret out the citations to back up what we're saying about the more complete picture around methylation. And I appreciate Gary's work. He's an excellent educator. He really is. He's able to simplify. I just think he went a little too simplistic
Well,
with
he
this. And
get
again,
the word out, and he has made a lot more people more aware.
absolutely. And you have how many genes can you talk about in 2 hours and 20 minutes with Joe Rogan? Like we've been talking now for over an hour, and I've talked in like broad brushes. Like we maybe talked specifically about 3 dozen genes, like in some level of detail. But I mean, to talk about 110 in detail, this is going to be days, you know?
Yeah.
So, it's again, as a public health educator, how there's always going to be some line drawn, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of offer a more rounded out view of what's happening with methylation.
Yeah, that was exactly why I reached out to you, to help kind of give the bigger picture to people. So I'll be in touch soon. Thanks a lot for your time. This was again epic. We'll be in touch. Anything else you want to add in?
I just encourage people to go to my website and opt in for one of my several books. You're on my mailing list and you get my genetics info.
Mhm.
And then there also will be on the website a link for the Genetics Plus program. And if you're actually interested in getting your genes analyzed, then that opportunity is available to you. And I guarantee you the value is way better than 5 genes for $600.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to order it as soon as I get around to it. I just sent off my hair mineral analysis test.
Mhm.
And what else have I done? Well, I'm doing actually hormone practitioner training now with Plat Wellness, but this year I'm just going to do all the tests.
Yeah. But when you say all the tests, what do you mean? Because all the tests is a.
Well, no, I'm going to do genetics. I just sent off my hair. I have the deuterium test. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. That's on my list of things to do. So I'm going to go get my checkup, my annual checkup. So here I'll be able to get some of the hormones done. I'm going to do the Dutch test. So that
Mhm.
I have a list of tests I want to get through.
What about stool and mitochondria?
Uh, well, my mitochondria action, from what my education, from what I know of mitochondria and metabolism, I'm pretty on point with that. I'm pretty good. I've no real, like, I have done a DEXA. I've had my chronological and biological age
Mm.
comparison done. My biological age says I'm 21, which or 29, which is pretty awesome. I don't have issues.
Not to brag.
Well, I don't have my energy production's pretty good, and I know what's going to pull me down if it's going to pull me down. So that's not at the top of my list. And as for stool tests, I don't. Well, I know I have diverticulosis. I've had that confirmed through MRI, so I'm pretty aware of that. I think I'm okay with my bowel movements right now. Like, again, they're not on the top of my list.
Sure, sure. So one thought is for a future podcast, if you want to go over the uh, big picture of all the different functional tests that in broad categories. So like you know your body very well. And I just think perhaps some of your listeners, they may want an overview, like what are the 5 categories of metabolic tests? So there's hormone
Yeah.
tests, you know, that there's like adrenals, sex hormones, thyroid, melatonin. Then there's the all the different digestive tests. So that's like the big stool tests like GI map, GIFX, GI360, CDSA. Then there's SIBO, and then there's food intolerance tests. And then naming all the companies, naming all the tests. So the first pass of what all the hormone and gut tests are. Then there's the mitochondrial tests, and that giant ball of wax of all the different things that go under mitochondria. Then there's the weird stuff tests. So that's Lyme, mold, metals, and
Lyme's a
environment.
big one here in where I
Yeah,
am. Yeah.
absolutely. And
So,
then there's genetics tests, which is the 5th category, which we've already covered.
well, let's schedule that in. I'll block off 3 hours in my
Oh,
schedule.
just okay.
Okay.
Wait, we need to be 4. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll be in touch about that. I'm sure people will be interested in that. Thanks again for your time. We're under the 90 minutes, but we're still
Oh,
over the hour.
all right. Okay. Well, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Okay. Bye, Shui. Thank you so much.